Pursuit. Young to old, from that very first handhold, clutched like paper straws, grasping for more. To games or winning fame or toys or childhood ploys, to chase after at the sunset, to pursue tomorrow's joys, to parties, grades, success and stability, for a career, for love, for an inner sense of serenity, reaching for the world to experience equality, security, whilst holding the hands of our very own insecurity and endless pursuit. Confusion of life's fusion of endless commotion and motion, emotion and motion and more. Pursuit of meaning when the world feels so dim, pursuit of community when friendship wanes thin, pursuit of perfect when the expectations never cease, pursuit of justice for there to finally be peace, pursuit of hope. Pursuit 2022, 7th to 11th of February. What are we searching for?
Hello, everyone. Is this on? Hello, hello, hello. Okay, hi. Welcome to Pursuit 2022, everyone. What are we searching for? My name is Miriam. I'm a second year doing linguistics at FITS. And just want to say welcome to you all, whether you've been coming to events earlier this week, if this is your first time in this church, in any church, welcome. Shout out to the people on the live stream as well. We're so glad that you're all here. But yeah, so Pursuit has been a week-long series of events, lunchtime and evening, if you haven't heard already. So we've got this lunchtime event now, international students event at 5:30 and 7 p.m. as well, evening events. And we've just been exploring, basically, what are we searching for? What do we spend all our time looking for in this world? So we've been having short talks, Q&As, food, lots more food. But today we're looking at justice. We've been looking at meaning, community, hope. No, not hope yet. These have all been live streamed, so if you've missed them, don't worry, you can still catch those. But yeah, today's talk is on justice. Quick few practicalities. So we've got toilets, one through this door here. We've got some more at the back, through that door, up the stairs. If you needed an accessible one, also through that door, but to the right. And if you need a quiet space, we've got through this door and up the stairs. So if you just need time by yourself, need time for reflection, feel free to use that. Yeah, so today's talk is on the environment, as you might be aware. Basically, what if it's too late to save the world? Which might sound a bit pessimistic, but we'll get into that. We've got our speaker, Niv Lobo. Give us a wave, Niv. Hi. So yeah, we're going to have a short talk from Niv. We're going to have a Q&A from questions from you guys, and you guys, even if you're watching online. And also lots of time for discussion, fingers crossed. So yeah, Niv, do you want to come on up? How are you doing, Niv?
I'm doing really, is this on? I'm doing really well. Although not as well as you, because it's not my birthday today.
There we go. He kept telling me he was going to mention that, and here we are. Okay, let's move on. Anyway, what do I know about Niv? Integrity. Yeah, honestly. Niv, you went to Cambridge. You... surprisingly, for a Christian Union speaker, love talking about Jesus. What else? Okay, I've got a question for you. What is your favorite Marvel movie?
We were talking about this earlier. I'm so old that I think, for me, the Marvel films feel like, I don't know, they feel like the Lego movie almost. I think they're amazing, though, some of them, but I just haven't seen all of them. I don't know how anyone has the time. I think my favorite is Thor Ragnarok, because when I watched that, I was genuinely blown away, and I didn't have to watch all the others to experience or enjoy it. Yeah,
that's a quality answer. I'm going to leave you to it. Over to you, Niv.
Great. Well, it's so good to have you here. If you're back with us, we're so glad you've come back. If you're here for the first time, thank you so much for joining us. My name's Niv. I'm normally based in Southampton. I'm a minister in the Church of England and a chaplain at the university there. And I love thinking about questions like these. So please do send us in your questions via the pigeonhole. And by the end of our time together, we'll be able to talk about them and have a conversation. And if you're joining us on the live stream, please feel free to do that as well. Our question today, the environment, what if it's too late to save the world? Recently, I read a book about trauma by a trauma specialist, a doctor who's been understanding the field, and he talked about a couple whose child he knows, who went to school, the child, so close to the Twin Towers. And 20 years ago, on 9/11, saw unspeakable things, scarring things, damaging things. And obviously, this trauma specialist wanted to understand how this child could heal from that experience. And so he saw this child one day, a few weeks after that horrible event, and he saw that the child had done a drawing, which might come up on the screens. And he noticed all sorts of things. Perhaps you can see them, the towers, the smoke, people falling, all sorts of things that child would have seen. But also, if you can see it, a small black circle at the bottom of one of the buildings. And the doctor, Bessel van der Kolk, asked the child, "What's that?" And the child said, "That's a trampoline, so that next time they can jump to safety." Next time. And the doctor said that capacity, that seemingly uniquely human capacity to think of the future differently next time, is part of what helps us cope with disaster. And that's what makes our question today so difficult and so urgent. What if the way humanity is treating the environment means there might not be a next time? Recently, there was a survey done over 10 countries, 10,000 people asked between the ages of 16 to 25, and here were the results. 59% of people said they were extremely worried. Over 50% felt sad, angry, anxious, powerless, helpless, and guilty. Over 45% said that climate change negatively affected their daily life and functioning. That's your age group, so I wonder how you're responding to the climate crisis we're hearing about. Do you feel totally numb? Do you find yourself wanting to ignore it because it just feels like too big a thing for any one of us to cope with? Or do you find yourself angry about it? During the pandemic, when pretty much everything else in normal life stopped, thousands of us took to the streets to protest about this. Maybe you were one of them. We are so desperate to save our world. But what if it's too late? What if it's too late? The predictions that we're hearing from people that we trust, scientists who know what they're talking about, unlike me, pose an existential threat to our way of life. The consequences will be dire for so many in the global south. Loss of livelihoods and habitat and lives. And when we think about all this, people are quick to use words like apocalyptic. This feels apocalyptic. And I agree with them, although not exactly in the way that they might mean. You see, the word apocalyptic is usually used to mean scary end-of-the-world stuff. And if you'll pardon a bit of theological pedantry, that's actually not what the word means. There's another word for that. Ask me about it later. The word apocalyptic actually means an unveiling, an uncovering, a revealing. And so I agree, the climate crisis is apocalyptic because it reveals so much about our world, about us. It reveals the truth about what's going on. So it reveals the truth about our world. As permanent damage appears to be done, there's a powerful sense of loss for so many of us. A dazzling array of wildlife dwindling into extinction. Places where humans used to thrive, no longer habitable. And it feels like a tragedy. We have a deep intuition that things should not be this way. Where does that intuition come from? One of my favorite novelists is a woman called Marilynne Robinson. Her novels are astounding. And she once wrote this in one of her nonfiction essays. Say that we are a puff of warm breath in a very cold universe. By this kind of reckoning, we are either immeasurably insignificant or we are incalculably precious and interesting. I tend towards the second view. Scarcity is said to create value, after all. Of course, value is a meaningful concept only where there is relationship, someone to do the valuing. So what makes our world valuable? What makes the biodiversity beautiful? Why should we keep protecting it? As we were thinking about yesterday and we'll think about again tonight, value only exists where there's relationship, like Marilynne Robinson says. Someone to do the valuing. And you might think, okay, well, that's easy. Us. Where's someone who'll do the valuing? That's what makes it valuable. But think about it for a moment, and that's actually fairly problematic. Because who is us? the same people causing the mess. The truth is, not all of us agree about what makes the world valuable. For some of us, it is more a resource to plunder than a planet to cherish. So if we're the ones doing the valuing, we might be in trouble. Where do we find the standard to adjudicate between those different understandings of what makes the world valuable? By what measure do our evaluations count as right or good or true? If the value of the natural world depends on what we say about it, then that's actually a dangerous position to be left in. And it's certainly not a secure foundation for responsible action. What makes our world valuable? The climate crisis reveals that we need a meaning bigger than any meaning we invent. We need a value that is real beyond our evaluations to judge those evaluations. And until we find that, we will only ever be part of the problem. Because if it's true that ultimate value depends on what we think, then that's of a piece with the thinking that says that the world only depends on what we find valuable in it. The world is just for us and what we make of it. And surely the climate crisis reveals it's not just for us. So who's it for? The value of the world needs someone outside us to value it. And that's why it's good news that there is a creator of this world who made it with precision and intent. So of course it matters. Of course its beauty is worth wondering at. Of course life on it is worth preserving, human and non-human life. The climate crisis reveals we need more than threadbare definitions of reality. But we need a meaning bigger than we are. And we need a picture of the world bigger than one person or one culture or one generation's point of view. And we'll only find it when we meet the creator of all of it. It reveals the truth about the world. It also reveals the truth about us and what we're capable of. The late, great Stephen Hawking of Cambridge once said this: "The human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet." How accurate is that? It's true that we are very small in the grand scheme of things, but just a chemical scum? The climate crisis actually shows there's more to us than that we have a disproportionate impact on the world around us, and how we live in it can change it. And in fact, that's something the Bible has said from the beginning, that there's a connection between how we live and the earth we live on. If we didn't believe it before, we must believe it now. The climate scientist, environmental lawyer James Speth is said to have come to this realization: "I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that." By the way, this is not the moment where all the English students go, "Yeah, of course you don't, scientist." No, that's not his point. The point is that none of us know how to deal with this. The climate crisis confronts us with human selfishness, greed, and apathy, and none of us seem able to deal with that. The way we're able to privilege our comfort, our agenda, over everything else, over everyone else. And clear warnings don't help us. We find ways of insulating ourselves against the truth. Did any of you watch the amazing TV show Chernobyl? Absolutely brilliant, well worth watching. And the running question throughout is, how does an RBMK reactor core explode? And no one has an answer. It's not meant to happen. But as you watch the series, they show, following a trail of corruption and lies, that key structural flaws were hidden in the name of saving money. And the protagonist, a real-life person called Valery Legasov, says this at a deposition: "When the truth offends, we lie, and lie until we can no longer remember it is even there. But it is still there. Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid." That is how an RBMK reactor core explodes. Lies. Disasters with global consequences come when we insulate ourselves against the truth. And the climate crisis tells us that there are meaningful and irresistible consequences to how we live, that selfishness, greed, and apathy have a cost. And sooner or later, that debt is paid. In the 20th century, it was easy to laugh at street preachers saying, "The end is nigh, change your ways." But now in the 21st century, none of us are laughing as street protesters say exactly the same thing, calling out the human capability that is so powerful and so damaging. The climate crisis reveals the truth about our world, the truth about us, and I also want to suggest it reveals what the Christian faith has to offer. We don't believe that it's too late for the world to be saved. We believe that there is a hope worth having that changes everything today, and we put on weeks like Pursuit so that you can explore that hope and even find it for yourself. But before I unpack it, I also need to be honest about how the way Christians have responded to that hope has been double-edged, sometimes part of the problem. It's a problem from the start of the Christian account and one from the end. So at the start, we read about how we were made, humanity, made in God's image, unique in that dignity in creation. And God says this, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And from that teaching of humanity in God's image has flowed a vision of humanity privileged over everything else, licensed to exploit everything else. And it's been an easy line for critics to draw between that and Descartes, with his famous vision of humanity as masters and possessors of nature. Is that part of the problem? And then another issue from the end of the Christian account, and I think you can find it, little printouts on your tables, Jesus speaking from Mark 13, a good representative example. "But in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man," which is Jesus' favorite name for himself, "coming with great power and glory." To give you the context, in that chapter, Jesus is first and foremost talking about the end of a world, because he's talking about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the far-reaching consequences of that for the life and faith of his people. But as you can see, he also starts talking about the end of the world and the upheaval that will bring when he returns. And some Christians have read that and thought, okay, well, if Jesus is coming back one day and he's going to change everything and the world is going to be decisively changed too, why bother? What's the point of caring about it? I've actually heard Christians say to me, well, it's all going to burn. What's the point of trying to look after it? Now, I don't want to speak ill of my fellow believers, but I believe that both of those are serious errors. Descartes is moving us away from the Bible, not towards it, with his promise of mastery and possession over nature. Because yes, we are called to rule, but we're called to rule as those in God's image. The way we rule has to image God and his delight in creation. And open the Bible and you will find so much about his delight in creation. The end of the book of Job has God talking about creatures that human beings have not tamed and don't really understand. And God says, they matter to me. They reflect my glory. I love those creatures. Jesus, when he's teaching Christians about how we can understand God's care, tells us to look at birds and look at flowers, because until we do, we won't understand how God looks after his own. Let me read something from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 24, the kind of imagery that Jesus is drawing on when he speaks in Mark 13. "The earth dries up and withers. The world languishes and withers. The heavens languish with the earth. The earth is defiled by its people. They have disobeyed the laws, violated the statutes, and broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse consumes the earth. Its people must bear their guilt. Therefore, earth's inhabitants are burned up and very few are left." It's a picture of a nightmare, but a nightmare caused by human behavior, by our failure to image God in how we live, in how we treat one another, in how we treat the world he's made, and in how we treat him, the maker. That's why we're having a conversation about saving the world. It needs saving, and so do we. And that is what God is in the business of doing. That's what Jesus says he came and died and rose again to achieve. That message has been changing the world ever since. Yes, sometimes Christians have been part of the problem, but so often also pressing for the solution. And that is what will change everything when Jesus returns. So no, it's not too late for the world to be saved. And until he returns, it's not too late for us to be saved either. And this is worth taking seriously because it gets to the heart of the issue, and I use that word advisedly. The climate crisis reveals that the real problem underneath the problems is our selfishness, our greed, our apathy. And if we're even a little self-aware, then that means that even our attempts to help could be part of causing more damage. It leaves us crying out for a solution at that heart level. And that is what Jesus has come to bring. See, the climate crisis we're learning we can't look away from is the wreckage and fallout of a spiritual crisis that we have spent our lives trying so hard not to see. The spiritual crisis that flows from our failure not to live as we know we should, not to live as we were made to live. Our ability to center ourselves, no matter what that means for other people, what that means for our world, or what that means for the God who made us and actually does belong at the center. And all that is why Jesus comes and chooses to die for us, to take the consequences for our wrongdoing, so that we can be forgiven, so that we can actually go from being part of the problem to being part of the solution. And then to rise again, to show that there is nothing so broken that he doesn't know how to fix it, nothing that he cannot make new in the end. So then people say, okay, well, if he's going to do all that restoring, should we just leave it all to him? Well, yes, Jesus will restore the world, but if you go on in Mark 13, you'll see that Jesus calls us to keep watch. Yes, he offers this forgiveness, but to receive this forgiveness is to be changed by it and to live differently because of it and to long to be more like the God who saved us, who delights in his creation. The logic that says God knows how to bring good out of evil, so let's do evil, is not Christian logic. There's literally a verse in the Bible taking that option off the table. Shall we sin so that grace may increase? By no means. You see, Jesus' forgiveness is not a ticket to some disembodied heaven. It's actually a summons to live in a world he is going to renew physically. It's not like a famous recent film that I won't name to avoid spoilers, in which at the end the earth is destroyed, but billionaires escape on an escape pod, and millennia later return and repopulate the earth. It is not like that. Jesus is not calling us to that kind of hope. He calls us to live transformed lives, renewed in the image of God, who loves his creation. So it's not too late to save the world. Jesus is going to do that. And the hope he offers will free us from being dominated by anxiety, but it won't feed our apathy. It'll fuel our action, free us up to do the things we know we should. Think of that famous moment, Martin Luther King Jr. He once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Does it? Science doesn't see any moral universes. It can only see the heat death of everything. But Martin Luther King Jr. knew Jesus' promise and took it seriously. He knew the vision of an ultimate renewal and reconciliation, which meant that it was worth striving for those things today. And that is what Christian hope can enable. Jesus' return doesn't undermine the validity of caring for creation. It establishes it. It motivates us for real action. And all the things I've said are just the beginning. There are so many practical issues, so many things to talk about. How do we live? How do we spend our money? What do we do? But imagine doing all of it with unshakable purpose, rather than out of blind panic. Imagine doing it because you know the one who can guide your intuitions about the preciousness of this world and direct them towards a hope that will not disappoint. And that begins with saying yes to what Jesus offers. That global problem will only be solved as we, as individuals, say yes to him. I wonder if any of you have read the novel The Life of Pi. And it begins in India, in a zoo that he grows up on. And there's an exhibit on the zoo called The Most Dangerous Animal in the Zoo. There are curtains there. What's behind it? Lions, tigers, bears. Pull it back, and it's a mirror. You are the most dangerous animal in the zoo. And if we are ever to lay hold of the kind of hope that would change everything, each one of us needs to have that mirror moment of knowing that I have been part of the problem. And each one of us needs to go to Jesus to discover the forgiveness he died to secure and the transformation he rose again to guarantee. And can I say, you could have it today. That's something you could have by saying yes to Jesus for yourself. You wouldn't even have to leave this building before you did. And if that's something you would like for yourself, I'll be just about there afterwards. Come talk to me about it. Come talk to me about how it could be yours. Thank you so much for listening. Why don't we take a moment to talk with those around us, send in lots of questions for the Pigeonhole, and thank you so much for listening.
Cool. If you can just start winding our conversations down. Sorry to stop any good discussions, but there'll be time for more of that later. Actually, before we get into the Q&A, there's something else I want to mention. Something called The Search is happening over the next 5 Mondays. It's really, really exciting, kind of similar to this, where we're going to explore more questions about wider Christianity, the historical accounts of Jesus' life. Basically, all of this is going to happen the next 5 Mondays. There's going to be more food and more good discussions, hopefully. So be there or be square. But anyway, let's get started with this Q&A. Top question. Climate crisis comes from capitalism and the unaccountability of big polluting companies much more than individual behavior. Why do Christians focus on personal sin rather than institutional sin?
Thank you very much. It's a good question, and I actually do go quite a long way with the premises it's articulating. So thank you for that. It is absolutely the case that there are structural issues here. But the reason why I focused on personal sin today is that actually structural sin and personal sin are connected. It wouldn't be possible to have any structural sin if there weren't personal sin, and I hope that makes sense. If this is your question, can I encourage you to read Augustine of Hippo, the 4th, 5th century Christian theologian? Because actually, way before Marx, he came up with a structural critique of injustice. He talks about how all humanity either has the project of the city of God and love of him, which rightly orders everything else, or the love of self, in which our ability to love one another and the environment is decisively warped. It is because we currently journey through the city of man, he calls it, it's the earthly city, that we have the issue we do. And capitalism, and look, I'm not an economist, but as a theologian, capitalism very much could be susceptible to that kind of critique, to being rooted in self-love. Now, there might be some Christian economists here who want to disagree with me, so please do, but I think I go very far with that. The thing is, though, when we only talk about structural injustice, as important as that is, but when we only talk about that, we deprive you as individuals of the agency to be part of the change. And so today, in trying to show you how Jesus addresses you as an individual, as well as how this message confronts wider society, I am inviting you to be part of the change. The kind of comment that says, it's all structural, so why should I bother, adds up, it accumulates, and if enough people think that way, nothing ever changes. So why not be part of the change?
No, that's really cool. Thanks, Niv. Okay, I am not the CEO of Shell or the President of the US. What difference does it make if I accept Jesus? I have no power.
Thank you. It's good to know we don't have anyone from Shell here. I don't know what they'd make of what I've been saying. Who knows? What difference would it make? Well, becoming Christian isn't just about fixing all the problems, but it is about joining a community which wants to be part of fixing those problems. And of course, in being part of that city, as Augustine talks about it, that new renewed society, we are seeking to bring change and we are advocating for it. We've talked already a little bit, and we'll hear more tonight about how individual Christians living that out has given us so much of what we value, the language of human rights, for instance. Come back tonight and explore that as Michael talks about it. There's every good reason for you as an individual not to see yourself as the one-person solution to everything, but to come and be part of a community that is seeking the work of the one who can be the one-person solution to everything. Now, that's an outrageous claim, but Jesus makes it. He says he'll be that one. And if you think to yourself, why even believe that? Just come back tomorrow lunchtime when we think about whether he really rose from the dead, and tomorrow evening. Because if he did, then he is actually in a position to say he can fix everything. And that would be worth knowing about. Yes, I'm not trying to pin massive, massive injustices on you as an individual, but I'm inviting you to see how, yes, even as individuals, we are woven into a network of injustice. And actually, it takes stepping back from that. It takes transformation from outside for us to begin to challenge that.
Oh, great. Kind of leads nicely onto our next question. Can't we fix the world without believing Jesus will come back, whatever that means?
Yes, and thank you for saying whatever that means, because there's a sense in which even a Christian like me would have to admit there is a huge degree of mystery to it. And tomorrow we'll think about a chapter in which Paul says, I tell you a mystery, and then talks about the kind of transformation that will come. So Christians believing Jesus' return does not mean that Christians say, I know exactly what it'll look like, and I've got this all figured out. Far from it. We are taking Jesus at his word. He says he'll return. So can we be part of the solution without having that belief? What's curious to me is that the climate crisis, and sorry, let me show my age a bit. Actually, when I was younger, I don't think people were talking about this issue as much as they are now. And as a result, I don't think people were talking about the importance of narrative to this. If you don't have a narrative big enough to anchor your convictions that the natural world is precious and worth being cared for, then you aren't going to care for it. And that is why a lot of environmental activists find themselves drawing on all sorts of religious traditions, reaching out for sort of shamanistic or animistic traditions, and lamenting the fact that actually in all of these folklores, etc., we have a closeness to nature, but actually in secular modernity we don't. But actually Christianity, and I hope I try to unpack that in this talk, absolutely talks about our embeddedness in nature. We are created on the same day as all the other animals in Genesis 1. I know there are different ways of reading that, but what that is at least saying is that we are part of the natural world. If you don't have that narrative, then actually you're not going to be able to fund your moral impetus to be part of the difference. And secondly, if you don't believe that there's any hope, if you don't think that anything is going to change this, if you think we are on a juggernaut headed to nowhere, what would you do? What should you do? Why should you do it? I go back to Martin Luther King Jr. What proved to be, in his example, the most helpful, the most transformative influence was him knowing that he was cutting with the grain of what God was doing, that he was pointing towards where history was headed. Imagine if our striving around these issues could be powered by that same motivation. And you could say, well, I don't need that motivation, I'll just do it anyway. Fine, but I think you'd discover that your resources to care dwindle.
Wow, yeah. Kind of connected to that, how can Jesus fix the climate crisis? You've kind of covered a bit. Would everyone have to become a Christian for that to happen?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and something towards which I was hinting a little. There is a sense in which Jesus' offer to us goes to the heart of the issue, the root of the issue, our hearts before him. And actually, his solution of everything is to recreate, renovate, if you like, renew this world. But if we were to be part of a renewed world with all the same selfishness, greed, and apathy, it wouldn't be that renewed world for long. We'd ruin it again. So actually, part and parcel of the world being renewed is humans being renewed. And that is not something Jesus will just do to you as if you were a robot, as if you had no agency or dignity. The agency with which he created you, he honors when he invites you to come and know him. That's why we put on a week like this, because it won't be automatic. The best things in life really aren't. This is free. You don't have to slave to achieve the rescue Jesus is offering. But like Michael was saying yesterday, you do have to say yes to it. And that's why we're putting on a week like this, so that you can see what it would mean to say yes to it. So thank you for that question. It is in many ways the question.
How does concern for the environment fit alongside our other priorities of social justice, relief aid, etc.? What do we prioritize first?
Huge question, and it takes great wisdom, and I do not have answers, neither macro nor micro, and I just want to say what the limits of my knowledge are. What I want to say, though, is that question is also asking about a holistic agenda for transforming our world. What would bring these things together? We know the goods of relief for the poor, food for the hungry, care for the planet, but how can they sit together? What kind of ethos could bring those together so that we saw these as part of a package rather than competing goods? Again, start following Jesus and you'll see. And there are remarkable examples around the world of that happening. In many cases, driven by Christian understandings of what capital G good is, towards which we should be striving. So no easy answers on that. Plenty of hard work to do. Some of you might be the ones to do it. And I pray that you'll do it well. But were you to come to Jesus, I think you'd find, again, resources to see how all of those are part of one big good towards which to strive, not multiple ones warring with one another.
Great. Thanks for that, Niv. I think two last questions. This is in response to something else you said, I think. But individuals are consumers who drive demand for unsustainable products. How do I convince people around me to do their part, even if they're not the CEO of Shell?
Brilliant question. And I guess what maybe if you're really asking that question, you can understand the street preacher from the 20th century saying the end is nigh. And perhaps you'll think more of him for it. The urgency and the desperation. What could I do to get other people to care? How could I get them to change? Well, I think the blunt instrument rarely works, doesn't it? It's very difficult to persuade other people to change just by telling them how wrong they are, as good as it makes us feel. How could we make that change? Again, it's a really good question. I think often people want to be informed. There's so much I love knowing about, but don't know about and need to be taught. And perhaps you can come back tonight where I think Amy Donovan, who's a scholar here at the university, whose first degree was in English. There's hope for us all. And is actually now a volcanologist. Is that right, Michael? Sorry, have I stolen one of your jokes? Apologies. But essentially, maybe she would have really good concrete solutions to that. But I do think, again, to go back to that word holistic, it comes to waking people up to their part in the whole world and their embeddedness in the whole world. And the only thing that can challenge consumerism is a different system of valuing things. If we were to find another reason to find the world valuable than just what we get out of it, that would make the difference. And that would keep us from consuming. And, you know, we're coming up to Lent in a few weeks, March the 2nd, and that is a season in which Christians historically fast and give stuff up. They don't do that because stuff is rubbish and they hate it. They do that because stuff is good, but we're so good at making it all about stuff. And temporary, deliberate stepping back is a way of reminding ourselves that consuming is not the way to be filled. Paradoxically, mysteriously, sometimes emptying ourselves can be the way to be filled. Anyway.
No, that's great. Okay, last question. It's a big one. If God gives the earth value, where does God's value come from?
Brilliant question. And I think that question reflects that we so often don't know what we're talking about when we're talking about God. We think of God as another item of furniture in the universe somewhere else. So that problem then becomes one of kind of regress. Okay, he gives it value, so therefore, where does his value come from? Christians have never thought that that's what God is. They've never thought that he was another object in the universe. He is a qualitatively different being, the being whose existence is why anything else exists. If you want to be a bit philosophical, everything is contingent, he alone is necessary. So actually, the buck does stop with him, and it has to. Sometimes people ask questions like, so who made God? So where does God's value come from? These questions are ways of articulating how different God is from everything else. It's kind of taken me a theology degree to understand that line of reasoning. So if that has kind of dropped and you're like, what does that mean? Tease it out in your head. Or read Thomas Aquinas and see for yourself, because it does check out. If you're open to the possibility that God is not just a bigger version of you, and the Bible has never said that he's just a bigger version of you, then he can be the one who gives us value, because he's the maker of us and everything else.
Great. No, thank you so much, Niv, for your insights, for your talk. It's been great to hear. Thank you guys for giving your questions. Also, thank you to the 42 people who wished me happy birthday. Very cheeky. But yeah, no, thank you all for coming. Just got a couple more things to talk about just before we end. We don't want this to be the end. Oh no. Pursuit is, the final day is tomorrow, Friday. But we have time now for you guys to chat. We have something called Pursuit Cafe. So 2 till 4, this space is going to be open. There's going to be hot drinks. There's going to be snacks. Might be fruit left over. This is just open for you to just chat. Ask the person next to you, what did you think of what Niv said? What does this topic mean to you? So anything like that. We've got the bookstall at the back. All these books are free. Woo! So yeah, go ahead and have a look. If anything takes your fancy, feel free to take it home. Something else is the feedback forms on your tables. You might have seen them already. Please let us know. How we can make our events better for next time. Like, what are your thoughts? Anything like that. There's a box at the back where you can put them in, and we're going to have a great time going through those. For those of you on the live stream, there are feedback and book forms on the event descriptions on YouTube and Facebook. So we've not forgotten you. So yeah, I think, sorry, a couple more things. There's International Students' Dinner, where I've been told there'll be free bubble tea and free dinner. Oh, luxuries. Okay, and the question is, on Jesus, why should I trust him above any other religious leader? Which I think is a really interesting question. So yeah, come along to that. And so that's at 5:30. At 7 p.m. we have Amy Donovan, fellow at Girton, She's really cool. And the question is on, essentially, what makes justice worth pursuing? What makes us worthy of human rights? And also a bit of live music, which is cool. So yeah, and tomorrow is the final day of Pursuit, sadly. It's on the topic of hope. The same lunchtime events, dinner and 7 p.m. But yeah, and also the search. So much going on. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming. It's been great to have you here. Carry on your conversations, and hopefully see you guys around.